All right, guys, welcome to the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast. I'm your host, John Heck, coming at you with another Q&A answered. So again, every Sunday on Instagram on my story, I'm putting up that Q&A box. Guys, send your questions in, and then that following Sunday, these will all be answered here on the podcast. So let me first and foremost say thank you to all the listeners, all the followers. You guys have made this start to the podcast awesome. We've had a lot of support. And that's only going to help. The more support and following we can get with this podcast, the more backing I can get, the more potential sponsorships that can come along, which only allows me to improve the production value of the podcast and continue to get better and better guests on the show. So just what to expect coming forward. On Tuesday, I'm going to be dropping my podcast that I did with Brandon Allen, one of the strongest powerlifters of all time. And then in the coming weeks beyond that, we'll go into the strongman world. Talking with a very accomplished strongman competitor and coach in Andrew Clayton. After that, we'll go to the football side of things, talking to the legendary strength and conditioning coach, Joe Big House Ken. After that, taking things more to the bodybuilding realm, we'll be talking with Justin Harris, who is one of the best bodybuilding prep coaches in the game. Speaking of Justin Harris, he is the owner of Troponin Supplements, who I've got a relationship with that company. I've been using their products for a few years now. Justin, he's one of the smartest in the industry. His products, in my opinion, are the best supplements out there. If you go to Troponin Supplements, make sure you go to the Troponin Supplements site, not the Troponin Nutrition site. That's where he offers his coaching services, all that. But on Troponin Supplements, use code HECK, that's capital HECK at checkout. You'll get a discount. I recommend all their supplements and apparel. After that, we'll have some more incredible lifters on. Shane Hunt. We'll talk to Hunter Henderson, who's an incredible female powerlifter and professional bodybuilder. We'll get Q Wiley on, who's an incredible strength and conditioning coach who really brings the physical therapy side of things into the equation. So a lot of awesome guests coming. Stay tuned. Those interviews will be coming every Tuesday. And again, we'll be doing this Q&A every Sunday. So let's go ahead. Let's get into the questions. Let me throw a little zen in, get the creative juices flowing. This is an essential tool in my podcasting. By the way, when it comes to nicotine use, be responsible. It can be highly addictive, but it can also be a beneficial tool when it comes to focus, mood enhancement, cognitive function. It's a nootropic. I'd kind of put it in a similar realm with caffeine. Use it strategically. Use it when it can actually help you. If you just use it all the time, you'll just build a tolerance to it. It'll do nothing for you. You'll be addicted to it. And yes, it will increase your blood pressure, increase your resting heart rate, all those things which can be a negative. But if you use it in low doses, sparingly, not every day, not all day, it can serve a great utility. Like when I'm doing a podcast right here, locked in. Okay, let's get into these questions. Advice for blue-collar workers using your power building program. Okay, first of all, respect to anyone who's working a manual labor job who is still making the effort to train on a regular basis. That is an uphill battle. It is not easy. So the name of the game in your situation is just going to be managing fatigue. Obviously, you're going to be expending a lot of energy, a lot of calories, probably on your feet a ton with whatever your job is. My power building program is a 5-day split. It might be worth consolidating that down into 4 days just to give you one additional day where you're not doubling down on your physical output. Gives you a little bit more recovery during the week. So you can take that 5th day, which is basically a back day, and kind of distribute some of those back exercises into the other 2 upper body days, make them more push-pull days. You might have to increase your food intake just to accommodate for the extra calorie expenditure when you're working a manual labor job and you're training. Sleep is going to be important. Now, I know a lot of people in your situation, they're having to wake up really early to get their training in, or they have to wake up really early for your job and then train in the evening. That's tough. Just try to get as much sleep as you can and make it the best quality sleep as you can, and double down on hydration. Hydration and electrolyte intake, that is going to go a long way. So next question. Is there a max amount of protein the body can really use in a meal? For example, 50 grams versus 150 grams per meal. Okay, so This is something that I think is a little bit of a misconception and it's looked at the wrong way. So there's always kind of this information floating around like, oh, the body can only absorb 30 grams of protein in one sitting, yada, yada. I like to look at this more as how much food can your body digest in one sitting? So, let's say you eat a ribeye steak. Let's say you eat, a 10-ounce ribeye. There's going to be upwards of 70 grams of protein in that. Now, a ribeye, when you eat it, it's not like boom, 70 grams of protein hits your bloodstream. A ribeye steak is going to digest for hours and hours and hours. So if you eat a big ribeye, you may have just taken in, upwards of 100 grams. If you get a 16-ounce ribeye, you may have taken in upwards of 100 grams of protein in one sitting. But again, that protein is going to be entering your bloodstream over the course of hours. It's not like your body just suddenly has to process this huge bolus of protein. Now, if you were to take something very fast digesting, like let's say you consumed 100 grams of protein via whey isolate in one sitting. Now, what's going to happen with that is the vast majority of it is just going to get converted into glucose. The majority of the protein we eat in general is just getting converted into glucose. But that's kind of highlighting the differences in digestibility. The steak, very high protein, digests over the course of hours. That protein slowly enters the system. The whey isolate, it kind of hits you much quicker, and then a lot of it just gets converted into glucose. So again, when you're thinking in terms of how much protein can my body absorb in one sitting, it's really more of a consideration of how long will it take my body to digest this food. There's not really going to be any legitimate cap on how much protein your body can just arbitrarily absorb. I mean, your body's going to be turning only a little bit of dietary protein into new muscle tissue throughout the day. So what I recommend is if you're trying to build muscle, just keep amino acids in the blood throughout the day, which is why I'm an advocate of more frequent eating. Just you're constantly keeping blood serum amino acids higher because you're ingesting protein throughout the day. But then, if you're only eating 3 meals, but you're eating, animal protein, red meat, things that are going to digest slowly. Again, that protein is going to be entering your bloodstream slowly over the course of hours, which is going to kind of distribute that protein intake all the way through the day. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, next question. Curious how the nerve injury is going with your calf and what you've done to help heal it. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, when I was competing in strongman, I was kind of at my peak in 2020, and then COVID hit. I was training for strongman nationals that ended up getting canceled. So I was training without a purpose really, but I was at my absolute strongest, and I was squatting one day and just my hips were just totally out of line. I went into that workout, just my mechanics were off. And then the next day I woke up and I had pins and needles running down my right leg. I attempted a deadlift session that week, and then I just felt like a lightning bolt shoot down my leg. And then from then on, I lost a lot of function in that right leg. I had a herniated disc that compressed the nerve. And this occurred right at the beginning of football season. And I was coaching, I was working for the University of North Carolina. And it was just something that at the time I probably should have and needed to address surgically, but I didn't. I was kind of dejected about the situation. Work was picking up, we're in season, and I was kind of in a mindset of, you know what, fuck it. Like I'm not even gonna try to get this operated on. I just gonna buckle down with work and just try to let this thing heal on its own. And over time, I have regained a lot of function above the knee. And this required me to take a lot of time off from anything axial loaded, squatting. I wasn't deadlifting. I spent a large period of time really focused on mobility work when it came to lower body stuff. I was doing things like, backward sled dragging, a lot of ankle mobility, single joint machine work, anything I could for the lower body that didn't irritate the nerve. And then eventually I got to a place where I was able to reintegrate with, some hinging, some squatting, things like that. And my right leg was so weak. I had to do a ton of unilateral work. And over time, I've been able to restore a lot of strength to the quad, the glute, the hamstring. There's still a significant deficit between limbs, maybe, a 15, maybe even 20% deficit. But then below the knee, the right calf is just, it's barely, I can't even do a body weight single leg calf raise on my right leg, which that essentially ended competitive strongman for me, because doing heavy moving events like heavy yoke, farmer carry, I just can't move and load that calf with a ton of weight on me. It's just asking for an Achilles tear. So it's definitely not to 100%. I'll probably never regain full function of that right calf. Now, it's not like I have drop foot. Like, I walk around, I can do most things fine. It's just a very weak calf. And then above the knee, I can do everything now. I can squat, I can deadlift. It's just there's a big asymmetry in strength there. So, that leads to back issues. It leads to hip issues when I start squatting and deadlifting heavy. So I've really had to get smart with my programming to work around that. Okay. Would you recommend your power building program for an off-season bodybuilder? Okay. Potentially. So I have another program, a physique program, which would probably be more quote unquote optimal for tissue building in the off season. For a bodybuilder, what is the goal in the off season? It's building tissue. Now, the power building program includes a lot of free weight stuff, which can that still be effective for hypertrophy? Yeah, absolutely. But the big question here is more one of what is optimal for tissue building. And generally speaking, if someone's goal is purely adding tissue, I'm going to recommend primarily machine work. Why? Because it's going to allow you to truly isolate a target muscle group. It's going to provide a ton of external stability, and it's going to allow you to push that target muscle to failure. So let's look at the quads, for example. Now, I would argue that something like a back squat is not an ideal quad builder. Why? Because it's going to incorporate so much other musculature, your posterior chain, your erectors, your core. It's going to have a high stability demand. When you reach your failure point, chances are it's not that your quads are failing. It might be that your low back is failing. It might be that your adductors are failing. It may be, a combination of all the above. Whereas if you do something like a hack squat, you're taking the other muscles out of the equation. You can isolate the quads and push a set to failure and be confident that it is the quadriceps that are being pushed to failure. Now, again, with that said, can you still get a good stimulus on the tissue with free weights? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at guys like Dorian and Ronnie who are doing heavy barbell movements. Now, again, these guys in a lot of ways are probably the exception, not the rule, but there are plenty of people who have built densely muscled physiques with a lot of free weight stuff. So optimal for hypertrophy, it's going to be more of a machine-based, truly bodybuilding approach, machines, cables, dumbbells. But if you're someone who just loves free weight stuff, you want to get under the squat bar, you want to deadlift, and that brings more of a motivation and intensity to your training, then you could argue that is better for your training, because the program that you're going to have the most success with is probably the one that you love doing, the one that gets you excited to go into the gym for. If you just think machine work is boring and lame, chances are you're not going to be bringing a level of intensity to it required to optimally grow. So I'm a big proponent of making sure you're doing training that you love doing, that doesn't mean it's easy. Doesn't mean you have to love every aspect of it, but there should be components of your training that get you fired up to do it. What do you think is the best macro split? Well, macro split, I mean, I'm assuming this is talking about, maybe a carb cycling approach. For most people, like let's throw the high, low, medium carb cycling split out the window. I would just recommend doing a split of, training days versus non-training days, where carbs are higher on your training days, fats are lower. And then on your non-training days, carbs are lower, fats are higher, and calories in general are lower. Now, in terms of a split, like, what percentage of your calories are coming from protein, what percentage carbs, what percentage fat, I'm not going to put generic arbitrary numbers on it. Generally speaking, if your goal is performance, your goal is physique, I'm going to recommend high protein intake. And that's usually going to be the old gram of protein per pound of body weight. Now, if you're in a surplus, that number can be lower. If you're in a deficit, maybe that number's higher. But then I would recommend having more calories coming from carbohydrates than fat. Carbohydrates they have the potential to be stored as glycogen, potential to be used as fuel. It is much more difficult for the body to store carbohydrates as fat than it is to store dietary fat as body fat. Um, Dietary fat is going to be much more calorie dense. And like I said, it has a much higher chance of being stored as body fat. And it's not going to be an ideal energy source in the way that carbohydrates are. So you look at all the bodybuilders and they are getting high to moderate carb intake, low fat intake. And generally that's what I recommend for performance and physique based goals. Okay. What differences did you see between position groups in football from a training standpoint? So, good question. Um, so, with most of the programs I worked in, we would split the team up into, your big man position groups and your skill position groups. And, in some places it was just a simple, kind of big men, then everybody else. And then you probably had your quarterbacks doing their own thing. Some programs, it was a three-way split where we had the big men, then we had kind of the middle tier position groups, the linebackers, tight ends, those types of positions, and then your true skill positions, receivers, DBs, and those guys. Regardless, the biggest differences you're going to see in a quality training program between position groups is going to be in the field work. In the weight room, there will still be some differences. For example, with the big men position groups, O-line, D-line, probably going to put a bigger emphasis on, bilateral squatting, just some of these heavier bilateral compound movements. Like with the big men, we'd be bilateral squatting heavy, overhead pressing, heavy bench work, close grip work. Whereas with the skill guys, you don't necessarily have to push the heavy bilateral squats. Like you can have a program that favors unilateral squatting for the skill guys. Chances are that's going to be more conducive to what they're doing. It's going to negatively impact the field work less, because the reality is for those speed-based positions, field work is going to be more important for them versus the big men, who you could argue the weight room is going to have more value for those guys. Being big and strong is a big component of being a lineman versus being a wide receiver or a DB. The name of the game is speed. So in the weight room, more of the heavy bilateral compound work for the big men, more unilateral dynamic effort, short and range of motion stuff for the skill positions. And then the quarterbacks, chances are they're doing their own thing, more rotational work, more shoulder care. They're probably not squatting with a barbell. They're probably squatting with a safety bar. They're probably not barbell benching, just mitigating any exercises that are going to put unnecessary wear and tear on the shoulder and the elbow, their throwing arm, and again, working a lot on rotational stuff. Now, as for the field work, this is where you see a big split. With the skill guys, there's got to be an emphasis on max velocity work, top end sprinting, whereas that's not necessarily something that should be or needs to be incorporated for the big men. In terms of conditioning, the energy system demands of the positions are going to be different. The line of scrimmage, they're operating in a phone booth. They're operating in a small space where they're having to explosively get off the line of scrimmage and enter into essentially hand-to-hand combat with another 300-pound man. So their conditioning is going to be much shorter distances, sled pushing for short distances, med ball slams, strongman based conditioning, pushing, pulling, carrying heavy, awkward objects, things that are going to train the energy systems that are relevant to playing on the line of scrimmage versus the outside the box, the skill position groups, where they're going to be getting out and running more. They're going to be running higher volumes, higher distances, again, a bigger premium on the top end speed work. Now, all the position groups, we're going to do some sort of acceleration training where that's, working on their get off, resisted sprinting, contrasted sprinting. So doing sprints with resisted sled, contrasted with body weight sprints for short distances, 10 to 20 yards. We'll do that for pretty much all the position groups. And then with the change of direction stuff, that's going to be huge for the big men. We might get into some more aggressive plyometrics with the skill position groups, preparing their tissue for the high speed forces of sprinting and route running and violent decelerations. So, kind of rambling there, but those are some of the distinctions between the position groups. Okay, next question. Key supplements you recommend for football players. So I wouldn't say there's any supplement that I think football players in particular should be taking. I think generically, creatine monohydrate is going to be a great supplement for any athlete. It's certainly not just football, but I would recommend creatine for any athlete. And sometimes there's kind of this like negative stigma around creatine, like, oh, it's going to dehydrate you. You're going to risk a muscle pull, and that is so overblown. There's completely overblown. There's so many benefits of creatine, whether you're an average Joe or an athlete. It has not only benefits from a performance standpoint, but also a cognitive standpoint. It's so good for the brain. It's been shown to have some anti-Alzheimer's effect, neuroregenerative properties. So, big proponent of creatine. Other than that, in terms of supplements for athletes, it's are you deficient in a particular vitamin or mineral? Something like vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, things you're not addressing with your diet. Things like that are always good to address, and that can be found in blood work or just kind of assessing the diet. Like, hey, my diet is low in veggies and fruit, things that contain potassium, magnesium. I would first recommend just adding in whole foods that contain those things, but it can always be good to supplement with those vitamins and minerals in supplement form. Gaining weight for young athletes. What's a good amount of carbs, fats, and proteins? Okay, so this is going to be more of a calorie equation. I recommend for anyone trying to gain weight that, first of all, don't do it blindly. There should be some sort of a tracking component to this. So, and this is where people tend to go wrong, is they're like, how do I gain weight? And it's like, well, do you know what you're eating right now? Like, do you have any sense of what your current intake is? And usually they don't. And then it's like, well, how do we know where to go from there then? To me, that's like saying, hey, I want to increase my bench press, but you don't give them any context of what their current program looks like. You can't just arbitrarily say, oh, just go in the gym and just throw something on the bar and maybe just use some more plates than you did last. Like, there's got to be a specific progressive protocol to it. And it's the same for diet. So I'd recommend do a food journal, take a food journal every day for a week, plug that into, a macro app, MyFitnessPal type of thing, get a sense of what your daily calorie intake looks like, take an average for all 7 days of the week. Boom. That's probably a good snapshot of your maintenance calories. And then from there, I would add 500 calories to that. That's going to be a good starting point to get your body into a surplus. Add 500 calories, shoot for that new daily calorie goal on a daily basis. Assess your body weight. Are things moving up? No? Okay, let's add in another 500 calories and continue that process. So just do some tracking, get some baseline numbers, add on to that. Now, in terms of protein, carbs, fats, I would recommend getting the majority of those additional calories from carbohydrates, like I addressed in a previous question, and shoot for that gram of protein per pound of body weight. Okay, next question. Do you do cardio during a bodybuilding phase, same day as lifting, or on a cardio only day? Okay, so good question. So in my opinion, if the goal is physique enhancement, when it comes to cardio, I am a huge advocate of walking. I'm a huge advocate of getting a large daily step count as opposed to doing traditional modalities of cardio. Why? Because it limits the interference effect. So if you're lifting, but then you're also in that week, you're getting onto the Stairmaster or the bike or the treadmill and you're doing a brutal cardio session, by its nature, that's going to be a catabolic session. It's going to put stress on the system. Whereas something like walking, it is very low stress. It's much more convenient. You can do it anytime, really any place. So I would shoot for 10,000 steps a day at a minimum. And then over the course of a diet, you can ramp that up as needed. You might be shooting for 15,000 or 20,000 steps a day. So like when I was dieting down, what I do is first thing in the morning, I go for about a mile up to even 2 mile walk. takes about 30 minutes. And it's a brisk walk. I just throw a podcast in, go for a walk, come in, eat meal one. I'm not sweating. I don't have to change my clothes. I don't have to go to the gym. I don't have to get on a piece of equipment. I just do it outside. And then throughout the day, I'll take a few 10-minute walks after meals. And then in the evening, I'll take another extended 20 to 30-minute walk. And by that time, I've racked up a huge step count. It incurs no recovery demand on my body, but all of that walking has added up to some significant calorie burning. So I would prefer daily high step counts and just be active, be on your feet. Usually, I think that's going to trump the cardio. Okay. Let's see. Completely tore my bicep tendon last week. Advice on recovery after surgery. Okay, so when it comes to injury stuff, I'm always going to be hesitant to give really specific prescriptions and approaches. That's something that you're going to obviously need to work with your physical therapist on. What I would recommend is get on a good nutrition plan. What can easily happen when you're coming off of a surgery and now your ability to train is decreased is you gain a lot of body fat. This is a great time to optimize your diet and get leaner. That is something you can still focus on during this time in the interim while you can't train your upper body as much. Now, I would certainly train around the bicep as much as you can. And, post surgery, the doctors are going to tell you, wait this long before you're sweating or this long before you're risking tearing the incisions, and listen to that. But when you can train, single arm stuff, do the lower body work that you can. It's probably going to be a lot of machine work or maybe even a safety bar, lower body options that don't require you to use that bicep. But again, my big point here is take that time to focus on the diet. Don't let yourself get fat during this time. No, take this time to get lean. Use this as an opportunity to set a new goal, a new body composition goal. Because again, although the bicep may limit you in the weight room, it's not going to limit your ability to get on a great diet. It's not going to eliminate or negatively affect your ability to improve your body composition. So I would set that new goal. Okay, let's see here. Do you prefer doing nutrition coaching or training coaching for your clients? Okay, so this is an interesting one, and this is largely going to depend on who I'm working with. So my passion is always going to be training programming. I love programming. I love the puzzle and I love the creativity that has to go into writing a training program. The tricky thing is when it comes to remote coaching is I can write the best program on paper, but that doesn't mean the individual using it is going to necessarily execute it effectively. I know for a fact that if I was there with that person in the gym, coaching their movement, pushing their intensity, that the end result would be better than just simply sending them the program on an Excel spreadsheet. So I love the programming for training, probably a little bit more than I like writing diets, but the downfall is there's just a little bit more of that disconnect because again, you're not there to coach technique and coach positioning and give them those cues. And I can review video and I do. And I'm adamant that anyone I'm working with sends in footage so I can give that coaching, but you can't quite replace that coaching when you're there in real time. And then the other thing is just the intensity component. You tell someone on paper, hey, push a set of hack squats to failure. Most people, their what they perceive as failure is not failure. Whereas if you were in the gym in their ear pushing them through the set, chances are that guy's going to get, another rep, if not 2 or 3 more reps. So there's always that little bit missing component that is lacked in just the writing the program that you don't have compared to when you're there in person, which can be a little frustrating. Versus the diet program, I can write a diet for you, and then I can accurately assess your body response to it, and I can make good adjustments. There's not that disconnect there. I can very effectively coach someone from a nutrition standpoint remotely. Now, it's not quite necessarily as challenging, as fun to write a diet. It's not necessarily as complicated for most people. Now, if you're working with someone who's chasing an extreme physique goal, a bodybuilder who's trying to get shredded, stage ready lean, okay, now the programming of the diet does become more complex and it does become a little more interesting. Or if you're programming nutrition for a massive strongman competitor, a 350-pound mass monster, the amount of food you've got to give them, and that puzzle of, okay, programming foods that are going to digest well and have them feeling good, but still keep them at the weight they need to compete at the level they need to compete at, like that becomes more complex. So to answer the question, I love both of it. I love training programming. It's just sometimes I'm frustrated because, man, I wish I could be there pushing them in the gym. And then maybe the writing the diets for most people isn't as complicated and as much of a puzzle, but I really feel like I can help accurately and precisely coach them through the whole process and make those right adjustments. And it's pretty black and white. Are you following the diet or are you not? Versus with training, it's like, yeah, you might be doing the program, just you might not be doing it well. Well, with the diet, it's like you either ate the food on the plan or you didn't, right? And it's very gratifying to help someone achieve a body composition goal, someone who's wanted to be lean all their life and they never have, to get someone there, incredibly gratifying. You can really change someone's life with nutrition. So a lot of times the end outcomes with diet coaching can be a lot more fulfilling and gratifying. So anyway, guys, that wraps up the questions for today. Again, if you're hearing this as I released it, it's a Sunday, so check out my Instagram. I've got that question box up in my story. You can send questions in and they will be answered on the podcast the following Sunday. And then stay tuned on Tuesday. I'll be dropping my podcast with Brandon Allen. And then every Tuesday moving forward beyond that will be another guest interview. So guys, keep supporting the podcast. Go to my YouTube channel, like, subscribe, keep growing that. Shoot me a DM on Instagram for one-on-one comprehensive diet or training coaching. Hit the links in my Instagram bio for my programs on Train Heroic, and then stay tuned. The Hammer and Chisel Performance website will be launching by the start of February. So anyway, guys, we'll see you next time.